I think I'll call this reflection the pot calling the kettle black. It came to me a few days ago when I saw a cartoon in the newspaper. It was a picture of the old typical Uncle Sam with his red, white, and blue costume and hat on. He had a smug look on his face and a broom in his hand. And right in front of him was a man with a TV camera, and on his belt was entitled Western Media. And Uncle Sam is saying, "I strongly condemn Russia's attack on the Ukraine." And right behind Uncle Sam, there's a carpet. And what you see underneath the carpet is skulls that he has just swept under there. And the skulls have their name on them. Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. Underneath the cartoon, there were the words, "Hypocrites relentlessly scream. The other is doing evil. The other is engaged in war crimes. They do this in order to hide the noise of the skeletons groaning in their own closets." Let's begin with a hypothetical. What would be the difference between Jesus saying, "Love your enemies, put up the sword," and Adolf Hitler or Winston Churchill saying, "Love your enemies and put up your sword"? The obvious difference would be that Jesus would have meant what he said and would have lived what he taught. Indeed, lived it unto his own murder by crucifixion. Stalin and Churchill, on the contrary, would not have meant what they said and would not have lived what they taught. They would have been hypocrites if they had spoken such words, which, of course, they never did. But what would churches or church leaders or Christians be who say Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God, God incarnate, but who nevertheless religiously support and participate in Stalin or Churchill's homicidal response to those they consider enemies? Would such churches, such church leaders, such Christians be called hypocrites? For most people, a person or a group's willingness to live according to his or her publicly stated truth is a very convincing piece of evidence that the person or group does, in fact, see it as the truth. Likewise, for most people, the unwillingness of a person or group to live according to their truth is very convincing evidence that the person or the group does not, in fact, see it as the truth and just wants to manipulate other people by lying to them. There is an old proverb on hypocrisy that goes this way: If you don't want to walk through the fire of your own truth, stop telling other people that they must. Moral superiority or outrage, which exudes the odor of hypocrisy from every single syllable, is repugnant to people. It is hypocritically preaching or imposing from a personal or communal din of corruption the virtues by which others must live, but you do not. Hypocrisy, then, is the situation in which a person or persons accuses others of or criticizes others for something they themselves are guilty of doing. In other words, it is the practice of engaging in the same behavior for which one condemns another. I suppose it's a way of trying to claim the moral high ground by pretending one is moral in a certain area where one is not, while simultaneously vilifying others for their immorality in that same area. Jesus, as we know, rails against hypocrisy. Yet hypocrisy, unfortunately, and self-evidently, has become one of the most prominent features of the leadership and membership of institutional Christianity, of churches founded in the name of Jesus, and of churches and church leaders and church communities supporting political and economic operations that simply are utterly inconsistent with what Jesus taught. This has been going on since the institutional mutation that took place in the 4th century, beginning at the time of Constantine. You see, governments, Roman governments, all governments are organized hypocrisies. Everyone lies whenever it's needed. Everyone pretends whenever it's needed. Politicians say what's ever necessary to get them elected or to keep them from being killed in office or whatever. Government is organized hypocrisy. So, once the church entered into a one hand washes the other deal with the Roman government, it was inevitable that the church, and especially its leadership, who were now enjoying the perks from the new wealth and the new power bestowed on it by the Roman government, were made into a near mirror image of the Roman government and its politicians, with all their vices: violence, enmity, war, lying, greed, hypocrisy. An up to the moment example of this is the Polish Catholic Bishops' Conference, which recently publicly and vigorously condemned the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. Archbishop Stanislaus Gadecki, speaking for the conference, said, "In connection with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, on behalf of the Polish Bishops' Conference, I strongly condemn the actions of Russia and of Vladimir Putin, recognizing them as unacceptable and shameful acts of barbarism directed against the sovereignty and freedom of an independent state." Strong words. I, however, do not remember hearing such a statement from the Catholic Polish bishops after March 19th, 2003, the day on which Poland, as part of the Bush-Cheney-Rumsfeld mercenary coalition of the willing, invaded the independent and sovereign nation of Iraq with unacceptable and shameful acts of barbarism that went on for 17 years. So, as not to unfairly isolate the Polish Catholic bishop hierarchy for their silence in relationship to Iraq, I do not, in fact, remember any Catholic bishops' conference from the United States, England, France, Germany, issuing any such moral condemnation regarding the invasion of Iraq after March 19, 2003. I also do not remember any of them issuing any similar moral condemnation of the United States and NATO's bloody invasions of Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, even though a large percentage of the people carrying out these unacceptable and shameful acts of barbarism directed against the sovereignty and the freedom of these independent states were Catholic and Christian. As a practical matter, bishops, priests, deacons, ministers, pastors, and their Christian congregations who worship in glass churches should not throw stones. Because if they do, it will come back to bite them eventually in their ecclesiastical glutimus maximus. And they will lose more and more spiritual credibility. As a theological matter, bishops, priests, deacons, ministers, pastors, and Christian congregations should not throw stones because they profess believing that Jesus is the Messiah and God incarnate. And he explicitly forbids stone throwing. Hypocrisy in relationship to violence and enmity, for example, in war, is one of the evil consequences that institutional Christianity brought into its way of operating when it replaced Jesus' authoritative, infallible teaching of nonviolent love of all under all circumstances with the infinitely open-ended pagan philosophical mind game called Christian just war theory. A theory which owed nothing to anything Jesus ever said or did. Jesus' straightforward, absolute teaching, by word and deed, of the nonviolent love of all in his model leaves no possibility for arguing whether homicide is just and whose homicide is unjust, or if hateful enmity is sometimes morally acceptable. Hence, for the Christian who follows Jesus, there is only one evaluation of war, and that is, war is as homicide is. War is evil. Whether it's called by human beings just or unjust, legitimate or illegitimate, necessary or romantic or sordid or arbitrary, war is evil. No exceptions. Once obedience to God's revelation in Jesus was set aside by the bishops of the church and was communicated to the flock and was replaced by an army of just war theories, then all hell was let loose on Christians and on the people of the world by the Constantinian churches for generations under generations, with, of course, each side in the war hypocritically posturing that the avalanche from hell it was releasing on others and on itself was morally justified by Jesus and his church because, quote, we Christians now have a just war theory. Indeed, we have many of them. Therefore, we no longer have to follow what Jesus teaches about violence and enmity. The bishops say we can follow either one, the just war theory or Jesus' teachings of nonviolent love of friends and enemies, and still be following Jesus and on our way to heaven. Close quote. So, Christian just war theories once made by the bishops equal to or a substitute for Jesus' way of nonviolent love of all make it possible for the gospel of Jesus Christ to now include the teaching that the pot can call the kettle black. Although, like love your enemies and put up your sword, it is the direct opposite of what Jesus explicitly taught. Namely, judge not. Take care of the beam in your own eye. Of course, every form of carnal hypocrisy in which church leaders and church communities take part, or a party to, derive from the ultimate hypocrisy of proclaiming that Jesus is God, while concurrently saying you or some other disintegrating carbon unit like you has the right, the power, and the wisdom to change Jesus' teaching on the way to conquer evil and death to the direct opposite of what Jesus said. And then to proclaim that your way is also a way to salvation, eternal salvation. There is the fundamental hypocrisy of Constantinian Christianity. And why in Christian Russia, in Christian Ukraine, in Christian the United States, France, Germany, hate, enmity, violence, war preparation absorbs the consciousnesses and the spirits of just about everyone that is Christian. They pay for it, they believe in it, they love it. Oh, they protest against it. But the vast majority of Christian forces in Russia, the Ukraine, England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, are Catholic or Christian. And their bishops provide them with military vicars and chaplains and military dioceses to teach that there is a way to salvation that Jesus never taught. In fact, that is the direct opposite of what Jesus taught. To think that you have the power to change, to alter, to reject the teaching of Jesus, to make a supplement to it that simply brackets it out or eliminates it from moral consciousness. To think that you have that power. To think that you have the power to straighten God out on how people should live so that they can reach eternal communion with Him is the height of hypocrisy. All other hypocrisy flows from that. I'm Emmanuel Charles McCarthy.